Hello, and welcome to the podcast, The Other Woman and the Wife, where we dive into why infidelity exists and what we can learn from it. Anne Marie and I are in the studio today, and we are discussing my least favorite narrative, limerence. And before I even started this podcast with Anne Marie, back when I was doing it with Kevin, I had told him that I would die before I did an episode on limerence. And here we are, fast forward 1 year later, and I'm doing an episode on limerence and I'm not going to die. So just to prove that your fears aren't real, here we go.
All right,
Okay.
Chelsea. I'm going to lead with the question of, do you think limerence is real?
Yes, limerence is real. Limerence is a real chemical reaction that occurs in your brain. It is not the cause of infidelity.
Bold statement.
Is it though?
Is
it really that bold? I almost think that when people blame drugs for an addiction problem, the drugs aren't the problem. It's the misuse of the substance that is the problem. That's it. And I don't think that a chemical reaction that biologically occurs in your brain is something that would compel you to step outside of a marriage. You know, there's something else at play here. There's a little bit more of a deep dive that we need to do to get to the answers that we need in order to move forward.
So why is it that you think that it is such a compelling narrative and why so many people are drawn to it?
I think it's so much easier to sweep things under the rug. Like, I grew up in the home where things happened and you just didn't talk about it and it would go away. And I think that is it's kind of like it falls right in line with someone who's avoidantly attached, where they will have an experience, not disclose what that experience was like for them, and pretend like it didn't happen. How can you solve a problem if you're not talking about it, type thing? Is it a problem if we're not giving it any attention?
Yeah. And I definitely can vouch that it still remains in your body. You still have to face it eventually. Anytime that you're pushing it down, it's going to come back to haunt you, whether it be physically or eventually emotionally.
Yeah. And I'll say that I think that people cling to the limerence explanation. I mean, if you think about it, right? We're all paying attention to content because there's something about it that explains a piece of ourselves to ourselves. And if the story we're telling ourselves isn't true, then we're really just vibing with our inauthenticity and faking it until we make it type thing. And so whenever I think about whether I would have clung to that label right after my affair, I sure as hell hope not, because it would have been an approach for me to evade a lot of personal responsibility, to not take my actions seriously and take my, I made a fucking commitment to myself and somebody else, and I defaulted on that commitment, and I took that very seriously. I think a lot of people will look at me and be like, oh, she just got married and she didn't really think through her decision. No, I fucking thought through that decision. I think I thought through the decision of my first marriage much more than I ever thought through the decision to proceed into a marriage with my affair partner. And I mean, it just goes to show you can prepare yourself for any event in life. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I would know that for me, I was very much seduced by the idea when I first heard about it. I had to do some mental gymnastics around it before I kind of was able to conclude why I was. And I think it's a very humans like to think of things in black and white. And we never want to be the villains in our own story. So if you can make a chemical reaction the villain, then you don't have to be the villain. It's the chemical reaction and you're the victim.
Oh, the victim mindset. That's right.
And you can live there. It's not very productive. And my brain definitely at a certain point was like, okay, there's something bigger that I need to dig into here. But I think that that's definitely, that was my experience. And I see how popular that idea is on certain social medias. And
Mhm.
that would be what I would think is one of the most seductive things about it.
It's just an easy explanation for a complex situation.
Yeah. And we love to find those as humans.
Mhm. Yeah, we do. But I feel like whenever we adopt them, right? Even when we adopt the inaccurate, easy explanation to what is happening in our lives, it demands to be assessed when it is inaccurate. It's like, I've been telling myself this whole time the affair is limerence. But I also did the research and it says that limerence only lasts a certain amount of time. And I've been in this affair for 16 years. So how does the math? It doesn't. It doesn't. You're just in a relationship that you can't tell anybody else about.
Yeah. The cognitive dissonance eventually creeps in. And
Hmm.
if you're
Hmm.
actually digging and you're actually looking to put it behind you and move forward, then you'll have to eventually
Yeah.
still come face to face with the fact that you chose to indulge in those
Hmm. Hmm.
chemicals per se.
Yeah, we all make choices. Some of them we're not very proud of, but I almost think it's the choices that we make that we're not very proud of that have the most in them for us. Even you talking about how you had, adopted the limerence narrative and it kept you at bay for a little bit and your curiosity peaked again. Damn, that curiosity always lead into intuition. And then you start to assess yourself more critically about, wait a second, what if it's limerence and I'm in an uncomfortable marriage? What if it's both? The whole idea of multiple things being true at the same time, like this is why short form content is so difficult for me to digest and produce, because it's like, it's not that simple. It cannot be conveyed in like a 3 minute, a 30-second TikTok, nothing. Like this actually requires time with yourself. And I just don't know that that really gets heard by a lot of people, and heard in a way where you're not bitching, complaining about your current place in life. I mean, like, you're sitting down, you're looking at the past experiences and being super honest about what that felt like for you. Because without that, I don't think that you have your compass and you are lost. And so then you just end up sticking yourself in situations where you will remain there because you don't know any different. And I'm going to get you out of there. We're going to get you out of there. We're going to build a business that gets you the fuck out of there, because I can tell that a lot of people are hurting by trying to claim a narrative that isn't accurate to them.
And I think it's really important to speak in eyes. So maybe for some people, that limerence perspective really does ring true. Maybe it was a one-off situation. Maybe it was and that limerence situation, but then to go and tell every single person who's ever had an affair that it was limerence because that was your experience, that's not a harmless thing to do.
But that wasn't even their experience. This is the thing that bothers me the most is limerence is a chemical reaction. The only way that you can assess that actually happening is by the person who's reporting on the experience. And if the person reporting on the experience is already at this place where stigma and stereotypes and all of that radical negativity is already compounding that person, they're just going to tell the story that matches the narrative that fits them best. They're not going to actually figure out whether it's limerence. How do they even detect it's limerence? Is there some fucking blood test? No, there's not. It's based on the individual reporting it.
You mean people aren't engaging in affairs and then checking in at the hospital to give a blood sample? Because,
The amount of times
there's a
the
controlled...
amount of times that I was convinced I was crazy, and walking into doctors' offices and being like, you got to check for everything, man, because look, I don't know what I'm doing with this life, but I'm fucking it all up. So there must be something scientifically wrong with me. And I was going absolutely crazy. But yeah, could you imagine if they could test for limerence? We did a test for limerence. You're positive. And
Hey, come on, affair partner. We got to go check in at the doctor's office to see if it's limerence or not. Is it twin
oh my
flame or is
God.
it limerence? If it's
Could you
limerence,
imagine
I'm just going to ghost you.
if I sent Stan a quiz and I was like, hey, I want to check if we have limerence. Can you fill out this quiz? He would be so fucking annoyed with me. It would be so good though. Maybe that's what we should develop on the website. Is your affair limerence?
Perform some
Take
research.
this quiz. And perform some research, but like, but Anne-Marie, can you educate the audience a little bit on where the term comes from and when it was developed and what it actually is in reference to?
Yes.
I feel like you're more the educator on the podcast.
Well, when I was checking into where the narrative came from, it tracks back to the 1970s. So it was conceptualized by a psychologist named Dorothy Tenov. And it describes an intense state of infatuation and preoccupation with another person, often characterized by obsessive thoughts and fantasies. The narrative linking affairs to limerence is also influenced by cultural perceptions and societal norms surrounding romantic love and fidelity. And I thought,
oh my God, I have great news. Hold on, I have great news. I just Googled Dorothy's alive. We should reach out, see if she's interested in being on the podcast and educating the entire world on what the relation or the correlation between limerence and infidelity is, and if she intended that concept to be utilized in infidelity content.
Yeah, because what I thought was funny is that after it goes into talking about that, it also ended on at least where I was getting my information from said, however, it's essential to recognize that the relationship between limerence and affairs is complex and multifaceted. While limerence may contribute to the emotional intensity of affairs, other factors such as relationship dissatisfaction, individual vulnerabilities, and situational circumstance also play crucial roles in shaping infidelity. Additionally, not all affairs are driven by limerence, and individuals may engage in extramarital relationships for a variety of reasons beyond romantic infatuation.
How compelling is that information now? You know, there's so much more that goes into human relationships than just, well, there was a chemical reaction in your brain. I think that's what I hated the most about it was it had deduced a human being and a relationship just down to drug addiction.
Yeah.
And I was like, oof.
And that removal of power, like for me, I don't have an addictive personality. I've considered oftentimes, do I, don't I, do I, don't I? And this actually set me back a step because I was like, maybe I do. Maybe this is my form of addiction. But then the more I thought about it, the more I walked myself out of that way of thinking. I still wasted brain power going there because someone was telling me that that's what it was. And my brain was like, oh, it must be true because they said so. And I think something that drives me the most crazy about the conversation with limerence and affairs is this push to have you go to couples counseling just without debate. This narrative that's pushed by some, it got a lot of view, it got a lot of attention. So a lot of people saw this. And this idea that you should ghost your affair partner and you should harm that other person to go back and wholly focus on what was good about your relationship. The relationship that was driving you externally to seek some type of validation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good place to go and
It's,
discuss.
it is an interesting place to wonder into because if the marriage didn't exist, what would be the problem with the affair relationship, right? The only way that this affair relationship exists is because of the pre-existing relationship. And I really like to speculate quite a bit about whether it is a problem with the relationship that predates the affair or whether it is a problem with the individual person who is behaving in a socially unacceptable way. And I think as I've read as many stories as I have, and I think I'm at like 3,000 now, I don't think it's one or the other. I just think that we have been conditioned to stay inside of relationships and have an expectation of not having the innate human abilities that we do, like denying ourselves, denying that our emotions exist, denying that we have unmet wants and needs and desires, because it feels like to meet those needs would be too overwhelming or it would require so much effort from somebody other than us. And we don't want to burden other people, which is just like a classic case of a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this push to go directly into couples counseling, how many people are actually well seasoned in therapy, individual therapy?
None.
Well versed, understand it, doing the work. And so, to the first time that
Maybe some.
maybe some, but I know for my generation and the people in my circles, I would say next to none. Like, we're all still learning. Like, even the ones who are like, I've been at it for 5 years and I'm still figuring out how to be honest with my therapist. So, if the first time that
Mm-hmm.
you're put in a therapist's room is when you're with your husband, and there's this huge elephant in the
And
room.
you cheated on him.
There's a huge elephant in the room. How is honesty supposed to come from those counselings?
That's not why they're there, right? They aren't there to be honest. They're there to fix the relationship. And I think what you're pointing out is nobody can actually fix that relationship that is external to that relationship. Yes, therapy will help in facilitating a safe space. I honestly, whenever I thought about therapy, because I started to get into the fundamentals of it, I was like, what is actually happening here? What is the chemical reaction at play? What am I trying to get out of this experience of therapy? I had been going to therapy for 3 years until it finally clicked that I wasn't there to perform for the therapist. I was there to unpack and disclose everything that was stuck inside of my head that I felt like I couldn't get out anywhere else. But if I had to do that in front of my husband, would not have the same effect. Never would. Every time Stan and I ever walked into a therapist's office, we'd walk out and I'd probably be twice as angry. Nah, screw that. 400% more angry. Because I'm like, you still don't fucking get it. That's where my focus was. You still don't get it. But I didn't need him to get it. I just needed to get it. I needed to know what I needed to do next. It was so interesting that I had such a compulsion to get him to understand something the same way that I understood it. And then I was paying somebody else to convince him to see it my way. Like I was abusing therapy at that point. I'm misusing a tool that was meant to be helpful. And then I realized my approach was all wrong. Therapy wasn't wrong. It was just me and how I was approaching it. But I think a lot of these couples, they get forced into couples or they force themselves. Nobody's being forced to do anything. They force themselves into the therapist's office because they have the marriage image so high up in their identity.
Yeah, the amount of times I've heard somebody say, I'm going to go to couples therapy for a few months and then I'm going to leave. That they're just basically doing it as a performative measure to show
Mm-hmm.
that they did everything possible to fix the marriage. I have a good story that's I think a really good example of therapy being abused. And I knew this couple and they were in couples counseling. And one of them was seeing the therapist separately on his own as well. And so they were in couples therapy, and it was acknowledged that his spouse was cheating on him actively. Then he was meeting with this same therapist separately. And I asked him, I was like, well, does your therapist know that you're also having an emotional affair currently? And he's like, well, no, I don't want that to like get used against me. And I remember thinking, you guys are wasting so much time and money and effort for this facade of couples therapy that isn't, and it's not even the therapist's fault. The therapist isn't being given the right information to work with either. And I just thought it was like the perfect example of why couples therapy isn't always the answer.
Yeah, I feel like it's less about it being the answer and it's more about a strategy you deploy after the fact with infidelity. I really love the couples who pursue couples counseling after infidelity to ensure that they can respectfully co parent together. Love that story so much. Not a lot of them do it, which is kind of why the shitstorm of infidelity has occurred. They're just not agreeable, respectful partners of one another. And that goes one or both ways. And that story that you just shared about the guy not giving the therapist all of the information, I actually wonder, does a therapist need all the information to be effective? Or do they just need honest information? I don't think you need all the information in order
That's
to make a
true.
decision. That's kind of how you head into the analysis paralysis thing.
Yeah.
Like, how much information does a therapist need in order to be effective in utilizing the strategy of therapy to help you problem solve your relationship problems?
Yeah. That's true. I'm not like here saying like couples therapy doesn't work, but both people have to do their individual work and both agree upon the therapist that they're going to see you
Mhm.
together. And that takes a lot of work. And there's just so few couples that I have met. I remember somebody saying that you can go to like family counseling or something to learn how to co parent healthily. I think they've started rebranding it from couples therapy.
And it's so funny. It's like what they actually do in these programs, right? I feel like I have a pretty broad understanding of what occurs. And what they're doing is they're teaching people how to communicate with one another in an effective, less emotional, less reactive way, which is totally beneficial to society. But that is actually what is at play when you are asking for a third party to opine on your situation. And I think it's when we realize that effective communication is up to the individual developing that skill set, we start to see that the change that is required is not of other people. The change that is required is of us, the individual. And then once you start to model changes in your midst, it's kind of like the entire world kind of changes around you. At least the way that you see the world changes, I think. When you start behaving differently, the world changes. If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer.
Some people would argue that the limerence narrative isn't harmful.
I think that the limerence narrative is very harmful.
Why do you think that it's harmful?
I think that the limerence narrative is why affair partners force a relationship to end and then repeat the offense because the narrative that they're clinging to isn't true. And so when you're working off of inaccurate logic, you are bound to repeat the experience until you learn your lesson, no, this didn't have to do with a chemical reaction inside of your brain. This actually had to do with the fact that the relationship wasn't over yet. The only people who determine whether a relationship is over are the people inside of that relationship. And if you cannot get yourself to a place where you are agreeable to ending the relationship, then there's an unexplored connection there. And I'm all for it as long as you don't have the need to deceive others. I think what I feel passionately about with this project is people feeling the need to deceive others about themselves. I think that that is the crux of it. So when I think about how the limerence narrative is harmful, it's exactly that. It leads to repeat offenses. I think that it would be really interesting if they went and did another study and they asked the question, did you believe you had limerence and then cheated again? Actually, I don't want them asking anybody any more questions, really. I'll ask that question of some people, I think, because in order to get an honest answer from people, you actually have to make them feel safe. And if you're telling them things like you're not special, you're an addict, you don't know how to make a commitment, you're
Your
worthless.
intuition was wrong.
There's
about that
no
person.
fucking way they're going to be honest with you. You're going to tell me I'm a shit person, I'm going to get really defensive. I'm going to get really defensive and not open up to you at all because I am worried about that too. You know? Like, you don't need to remind me that I'm capable of being bad. I'm well aware of it.
Which that goes into that shame-based approach, which is just one of the more overwhelming umbrella ways that it's dealt with in society and online, is this shame-based approach. And it's so unproductive because of all it does is, like you said, it either pisses people off or it makes them shut down, or it does both at the same time.
And it's interesting though, because whenever I think about like the way that people express themselves, right? Because I think how you're expressing yourself is for you, not necessarily anybody else. And so whenever I think of somebody coming to the infidelity conversation and saying things like, well, you knew he was married, right? That person is exuding in that moment shock, appall, distaste. I'm not going to tell them any more of my story because I already know how they're going to react, right? We all do this inside of our heads. We choose not to disclose to certain people because we know how they feel about it. So I think that the limerence narrative is toxic.
And I think that a lot of people that come to the community, it's the first time they've ever opened up about it to anyone.
Yeah. I remember clearly the first person I told and how good it felt to realize that my life wasn't over. This did not define my life. This was like a moment in time that I was going to trek through, but that disclosure piece, and not to the person that you cheated on, but the piece where you're like, hey, I've got this big problem over here. I don't know how to handle it. And you finally tell someone it exists, it's like, oh, they know. But it has to be the right person.
Exactly. My experience was telling the wrong person.
What happened?
It was just an underwhelming response. It was basically like, oh, you did that? That's uncomfortable. And then they basically changed the subject.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Really?
And I was like, well, choose better friends. Let's put that on the checklist of things I need to do in my life, and never tell anyone again. That's the second thing. And it wasn't until I saw other people through your page having the conversation openly that I was like, oh, maybe I'm just going to join this community and then I know that I'll get the proper response. And that was the first time I opened up.
Really? That was the first time you opened up?
Outside of opening up to my husband and disclosing. But again, that's not the same.
There was nobody for you to talk to.
There was no, my parents came from you don't talk about divorce because you don't get divorced. That was that logic. My friends all came from rural religious America where they just changed the subject because if it was uncomfortable. And I wasn't going to bring it up to siblings because they were raised in the same household I was, which was a don't ask, don't tell kind of mentality. And I thought all I needed was my husband's forgiveness. It wasn't even occurring to me that I needed my own forgiveness or that I needed to work this
Really?
problem out. Not at first. Like at first I was like, oh, you forgive me? Okay. I guess this is what we're doing. Aren't I lucky? Aren't I the luckiest in the land? And then it took time, and then it took hearing other conversations.
Wait, so okay, aren't I the luckiest in the land? Let's go back to that for a second really quick. Were you kind of hopeful that he would have just rejected you?
I think I thought that he would. I think honestly that the affair stemmed from my masculine, in that I knew that our relationship had a lot of problems that neither of us were like mature enough to deal with. And so when I executed that affair, I was like, well, now this will be over. And then when I told my husband and he was like, I don't want a divorce, I didn't think I could ask for one, because it was kind of like my fall plan was that this was going to be the thing that made it happen.
Oh my God, you were going to let him make all the decisions again.
Yeah. Then I also was in this place of guilt and this place of, now I have to, I'll just be really hard on myself and I'll cut everybody out of my life that could ever potentially even be viewed as a temptation. I'll just isolate myself and I'll focus solely on my marriage. And that's what's going to fix it, is
Oh
from
my
this point
God.
on.
The thing that took it out of you was the thing that you kept going back to.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here, Anne Marie.
Yes, I was very happy to then find the community and then be like, oh my gosh, there's so many people that have experienced this and are moving forward with their lives anyways. And then that was what got me. I didn't even tell my first couple of therapists. It wasn't until my third therapist that I finally divulged that information. Talk about not doing therapy right, or knowing how to utilize therapy properly. Because I was just so ashamed of it that I was like, I don't want them judging me.
You know, I'll say that the way that I got past the fear of judgment of others was, what could they really do with this information and why would they be interested in doing it? I remember even, contemplating doing the whole community thing. There are people in there that are like scared for their lives. And then there are people who have made it to the other side of disclosure or discovery. And they are not living in fear of what will happen next anymore. They're not living in fear of if I get found out. They are way more self-assured. And they're like, all right, this shit happened. I'm standing in my own truth. I'm figuring out what needs to come next. And I think that's the value. That is the value of being able to connect with others who have had an experience similar to you. So yeah, fucking therapy. Therapy, like people have these magical beliefs around therapy where it's like, oh, if I go to a therapist, everything will be solved. I mean, there are great therapists out there, like Grace from episodes ago. She got a tattoo with her therapist. She wanted to get a tattoo referencing her therapist, and therapists are helpful people. People are helpful. Not every single therapist is equipped to help you in your unique circumstance. I don't think. I've seen way too much damage. I think one of the first coaching calls I had, I cried because she told me how the therapist shamed her. And I was like, what in the actual fuck? Why is this lady so unaware and teaching people about awareness?
Yep, not every therapist is built for every person. You have to try multiple therapists to find the one that's going to match you. And that does take privilege. It's not just offered to everybody. And my favorite song is Growing Sideways by Noah Kahan. And he always opens his concerts for this song where he goes, I spent 8 years in therapy with no success because I wasn't being honest. And then a couple of years ago, I actually started being honest. And guess what? My life got so much better. Be honest in therapy, folks. That's like his little intro to it all of the time. Because, yeah, he refers to
You're going to his
it.
concert soon, aren't you?
Yeah, in June.
Yeah.
And,
That's rad.
yeah, he references it as growing sideways. You're just staying stagnant. You're not growing.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
just,
yeah.
when you're in, especially if you're already taking the steps to know you need therapy and then you're not being honest with your therapist, there's
Mhm.
nowhere to go up from there because your therapist can only help you to the amount of honesty that you can divulge to them.
Yeah. And if you don't feel safe around your therapist, I think that's a clue too.
Yeah, for sure. One of the reasons I think that limerence is such a kind of dangerous narrative to live by is because it's super limiting and it stalls your self growth.
Mhm.
Like, if
It
you're,
definitely stunts the self exploration piece. If I can explain it away with some rational explanation to myself, even though this totally encompassed emotion, like that's where I think that emotional understanding comes into play. And most people are very afraid of their own feelings. And I think it's that fear of your feelings that will cause you to end up in a hyper emotional state. But I think that whether limerence is a truly an addiction or not, I I think that limerence is the rational explanation for the experience of falling in love. And am I addicted to falling in love? You bet your ass. But not with people, with myself, with my life, with my experiences in life. Like the experience of falling in love with somebody else mutually at the same time does not always need a rational explanation.
and I think if you step back and you look at limerence outside of romantic love, because it does exist outside of romantic love, that's when you can really
Mhm.
start getting to why it's just so counterproductive to only assign it in your vocabulary in your head to romantic love. Because limerence can be really good for you if you gain limerence by doing a practice every day for a month. And all of a sudden, you like to wake up in the morning and do that exercise or get in that cold bath. If it's like something that's constructively making your life better, then it's a positive thing. So to demonize the chemical reaction in that way, you're just undercutting all of the value it could bring to your life.
Whenever we villainize substances or natural resources, I think we are not doing the world justice because everything is kind of intertwined. Everything that is here is necessary. Everything that has happened in the past was meant to be. Like, I'm a pretty firm believer in that. And I remember when I was little thinking that certain creatures on the earth, I'll take snakes, for example. Why do the snakes need to exist? They are scary. They look like they could really hurt me. All of that shit, right? All fear based responses. And then I started to think about how necessary they must be to the ecosystem and like to the planet, and really having a more holistic understanding around necessities of the world. And we placate them with all of this negative jargon that puts people into a state of fear.
And no good decisions are ever made from a place of fear.
I don't know. Maybe some are.
I mean,
Like,
life saving
did you hear about
ones.
the baby? Yeah. Did you hear about the baby in the Sydney, Australia mall? Her
Mm.
mom, they were like attacked by some guy with a knife, and she threw the baby to somebody to save the baby. I mean, she was afraid that the baby was going to lose
Mm-hmm.
the baby's life, right? So, like, fear is a motivating force. Do I think that it should be your motivating force in personal decisions? Hell no. Hell no.
Yeah, you should have the emotional maturity and bandwidth to understand where fear is preventing you from succeeding in areas of your life and where it's
Yeah.
actually helpful.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was funny because in that first video we watched, I noticed that it was said first there that it's the phrase that caught your ear yesterday when we were talking about this of it's just limerence.
Oh, yeah. Let's just sweep it under the rug. I just completely acted in deceit, and let's pretend like it didn't happen. And we'll call it a chemical reaction in my brain.
Mm-hmm. And I remember yesterday you were like,
Oh, I was on one yesterday. I was like, oh, well, why can't we just say it's just marriage? If we're going to reduce a extreme relationship, I think that affairs are extreme relationships. I mean, talk about taking. That's a risk. That's a risk. And yeah, whenever they say it's just limerence, it's not the love of your life, it's just limerence. I'm like, you haven't even talked to this person. You don't know. You have no idea. Like, why can't we also just look at their marriage and say it's just a marriage? Or look at infidelity, which honestly, I hope we do get to a neutral point in the infidelity conversation because how else are we supposed to be productive? If we're on polarizing ends of the conversation, all we're doing is fighting with each other, And
I
I invited
saw
Dr. Kathy to this podcast back in the day and she declined, but I think that she might be more inclined now that we've kind of, professed up a little bit.
I'm not saying that this is a healthy mindset to have, but I did see a video of a woman and she had a pancake and she's like, marriages are like pancakes. The first one can go in the trash. She like flipped it and I remember thinking like,
oh no, she says marriages are like pancakes. No shame in throwing the first one out.
yes, no shame in throwing the first one out. That's much, much more eloquent and much more correct to what she said.
But it's also funny, what I always find funny about like statements like that is that, she says no shame in throwing the first one out. And it's ha ha ha. Yes, a lot of first marriages end in divorce type thing. But at the same time, I'm like, you're saying no shame, but you're definitely exposing that the shame exists anyways. That's what I love about statements like that, because there's so much inside of a tiny little sentence. Our babysitter always tells me to say less.
Yeah, short form content. That's an example of where you can really use your words carefully.
Mm-hmm. Impeccable with my words.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working at that. But yeah, I think that it is really funny, this quote that you put in here from yesterday. I said, why can't we also just say it's just infidelity? Oh, why can't we just say it's just marriage? Like, it's another social construct. And the purpose of social construct is to help us understand things. And so, why does one have this glorified light on it and this other one have this fucking lock on it? I feel like I'm unlocking Pandora's box by engaging in this conversation.
Yeah.
And it definitely feels like a do not open, do not open. Oh shit, you opened it. Now you can't close it.
Yeah, definitely. It's been closed a long time.
Well, I don't even know that anybody else, I don't know. I really don't know if anybody else has taken this approach, which was the intoxicating aspect of, it's probably the limerence aspect of this venture for me, which is I hadn't seen anybody else doing it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to change the approach to a problem I saw in the world. Like, I just started reiterating my own philosophies in my life into my professional life as well.
Mm-hmm. And I just think that, to me, what I find to be the most satisfying thing about the community and about this project that you started and like this way that you started looking at it is when I go into the community, it's just a bunch of women cheering a bunch of other women on to support themselves, make the decision that feels right to you, and just go with it. Like, just decide what's right for you, decide what's right for your happiness, stop worrying about all of the external things. Like,
it's also trust yourself that once you make a move, you'll know what the next move is. Usually we're just stunted because we're afraid to make the first move in a decision that we know we need to make. I really just think it's the lack of decision that highlights what is actually needed, what is actually necessary,
Yeah, the ability to surrender to whatever outcome comes. Like, that ability to sit comfortably in your own intuition, in your own knowing that you're going to make this move and that you can surrender to whatever the consequences or the non-consequences are. Like you're
I
surrendering
would just
to
say
it.
reactions. A consequence even implies negativity, but some of these people, they go and they expose their affair, and then their spouse is like, oh shit, I've been having one too. And it's okay. There was definitely a disconnect. Let's, figure out what it is we need to do next, because the lack of transparency doesn't really lead to a fulfilling relationship. I think when you're hiding things from people, it's because you don't want them to see certain aspects of you.
And when you say you're going to be with somebody forever, it becomes really easy to start hiding stuff. I don't want you to know that about me forever.
Yeah. Whenever I first started, there was one person who was like, oh my God, you're like the affair whisperer. I was like, I'll take that title. I'll totally take that title. I do think that you cannot solve a problem without talking about it, type thing. And staring at a problem doesn't solve a problem. I think that when you start talking about it, that's when you can actually take the freedom that was yours all along. Not even take it, receive it, man. It was there the whole time.
Surrender to it.
It was there the whole time. Yeah, surrender to it for sure. And surrender to allowing other people to react the way that they want to react while protecting yourself, because some of you guys are in fucked up situations. But yeah, whenever I think about the propensity of telling someone that it's over, or the way that you have perceived reality for X amount of time was not accurate, that is a heavy decision to go into. But I think if you're listening to this podcast, then you're probably ready to make it. Be free. I would love to hear from the listeners who have felt validated by the limerence narrative. I would love to find out how it validated your experience, and whether there was anything else for you to learn, even if that narrative was true for you. I think that there's never just one narrative. It's a whole clusterfuck of experiences, and there's lots to say about it. So I would actually love to pose a question to the listener. If you've experienced infidelity and you believe that your infidelity was the result of limerence, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from firsthand experiences. Listening to Reese and Dr. Kathy talk about limerence, from what I know of their personal stories, I don't know how it fits. And obviously, it's not my fucking narrative to apply. And I'm glad that, this narrative fits for them in their lives. But at the same time, I'm like, if it were me, it wouldn't be that way. And that's likely because I'm me and they them. They them.
So yeah, definitely, listeners, we can put it in the comment section. We can go to the website. All the links are available to you. Please let us know how limerence has affected your life if you have been in this situation.
Or maybe the question we pose is, how did clinging to the limerence label change your behavior in a sustainable way? Did it change your behavior? Did understanding limerence change your behavior at all? Or did it just change the amount of information that you had inside of your brain to obsess with? Yeah.
I like it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.